Well, good evening and Sunday Night Live. And before we get into our distinguished visitor this evening, I have a few things to say about the present situation with the attack on the Catholic Church throughout the world. A couple of quotations. A very well-known Jewish businessman from Cleveland has put into the out into the whole world the following statement. He has a long statement, but he writes, "During my entire life, I have never seen a greater vindictive, more scurrilous, biased campaign against the Catholic Church as I have seen in the last 18 months. And the strangest thing is that this is a country like the United States where there is supposed to be mutual respect and freedom for all religions." Now, Sam Miller is making this very, very well, and you can pick it right up on your internet on the what is called the Orate Fratres, O-R-A-T-E Fratres. Sam goes on further. He quotes from the Sojourner magazine. Now, this is a very fine Protestant magazine of Orthodox Protestants, dated late August. While much of the recent media hype has focused on the Catholic Church pedophilia scandal, relatively little attention is given to the high rate of sexual misconduct of the rest of American Christendom. This is only a crisis that crosses the border of all religions. Now, I don't like to do this, and by no means am I meaning to be an offensive to Protestants who are dear friends, and I always speak about Protestants and Jews and Muslims and Buddhists in this program well. But the following quotation from Mr. Miller. Let me give you some figures that Catholics should know and remember. For example, the research by Richard Blackman at Fuller Theological Seminary, a very well-known, respected Protestant seminary, shows that 12% of the 300 Protestant clergy surveyed admitted to sexual relations with a parishioner, and 38 acknowledged that there was some inappropriate sexual contact. In 1990, a study was done by the United Methodist Church that 41 clergy women reported unwanted sexual behavior by a colleague. And there, Philip Jenkins, a well-known Protestant writer on these subjects, concludes in his book, Pedophiles and Priests. Now pay attention, that while 1.7% of the Catholic clergy have been found guilty of pedophilia, 10% of Protestant ministers have been found guilty of pedophilia. Now, we're saddened by those statistics on all around. But raising the question, why is the media, led by the New York Times and newspapers related to the ownership of the Times, why are they constantly attacking the Catholic Church? And in other countries as well, in France, there's a popular magazine, something like Newsweek, called Le Monde. And that shows a caricature on the front page of the Pope sodomizing a youngster. How iniquitous, how wicked is this? And of course, it is deplorable that this can happen, that it is not brought to justice. But I want to ask the question. The American Educational Association, which is largely concerned about elementary and secondary public school, claims that 1 out of every 7 girls has been sexually bothered. Now, that doesn't always mean a sexual act. It could be also verbally. Does anybody in the world think that only Catholic priests in the world have this particular problem? No, it's a very wicked, iniquitous thing. And I want to say that the abuse of the media, largely, and an attack on the Catholic Church and the Bishop of Rome is iniquitous. And I would encourage you to discontinue any papers, magazines, etc., that use these things. Cancel them. Don't support them and speak against them. They have become a source of iniquity. I'll be back. I promised a full evening on this subject, but I'm not quite ready yet, but I'm getting ready. Now, this evening, to a much more happy subject, our meeting with welcoming our visitor this evening, Dr. Kyle Beiter. And this has been a tough day, Dr. Beiter, because we were also having Dr. Ann Melnick be on with the broadcast, but Dr. Melnick got caught in traffic. I got in traffic too. I almost got across the bridge. So we want to welcome in Dr. Beiter, and an issue that's extremely important, morally, medically, is the issue of the care for mothers and children at the time of birth, conception, and birth, bringing into the world.
Yes.
And there's so many serious moral issues. And I'd like to open this up to Dr. Beiter, to the subject.
Yes. Well, thank you, Father, for having me tonight. And
well, I should mention that you are a staff member of the clinic, which is named after Blessed Gianna Molla. And in 2 weeks, the son of Dr. Gianna Molla is going to be on this broadcast.
Yes. Yes, the Gianna Center in New York City with Dr. Melnick. And, we are one of a small number of healthcare clinics that are 100% pro-life Catholic in our orientation. And it's ideally there would be many of these throughout the country. Unfortunately, there's only a handful. One here in New York City, which we recently started, one in Omaha, one in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in St. Louis. So they're slowly starting to crop up, but there is a real need. Gosh, if you could see and hear what we do, there is a real need and desire of the Catholic women in this country, not only the Catholic women, but just women who want health care without the sterilization, the contraception, the abortion being pushed on them. They I think, have seen through that and don't want to have a part in it, and are frustrated that it's so ingrained in our American healthcare system.
Yes, and I think also an area that you've been very concerned about, women trying to have a child.
Exactly.
And sometimes that can lead, unfortunately, into behavior that's against the divine law.
Sure.
And the woman doesn't have that as an intention.
Right.
But
well, it's infertility treatments. Obviously the church is very sympathetic, and we want to be fruitful and multiply. That's straight from the Bible, and we want to help women to do that in a moral way. And unfortunately, the larger medical community sees IVF and intrauterine insemination as well as the gold standard of treatment. Unfortunately, IVF...
You must tell me, I don't know.
Sure. It stands for in vitro fertilization. That's a process whereby physicians surgically take an egg from the woman and sperm from the male. They make a conception or fertilization in a lab dish, and then instill the new embryos, these new human lives, instill them into the uterus. Several problems with this. Obviously, it goes against the church teaching the principle that new life should come from an act of love between husband and wife. So it definitely circumvents that. But it also leads to the problem of many excess embryos, new human lives, left over in storage. And that's one big problem. So what happens with these embryos? Either research sometimes is performed upon them, or they're discarded if they can't be placed inside the womb. Another problem is sometimes when they instill the embryos in the uterus, they can put too many in and get multiple pregnancies. So instead of a single baby, many times you can get twins, triplets, quadruplets, and so forth. A pregnancy like that is very high risk and very hard to carry to term. And so they recommend a selective reduction or an abortion of one or several of the unborn children.
Yes, and here you are, along with Dr. Melnick, here in this great big city of 20 million people in the whole metropolitan area, doing this all by yourself. Tell me, do people understand and know that this opportunity is available?
Well, a lot of people don't, and that's frustrating. Also, with the recent closure of St. Vincent's Hospital, the last Catholic hospital in New York City, they may be even less aware. We were affiliated with St. Vincent's, and unfortunately that affiliation cannot continue because St. Vincent's is closing. So we're trying to get the word out that this opportunity is here in New York City, and that we want to be here for the women in this community.
Now, what are we going to do? What coming's next?
Right. For the Gianna Center, or for?
Well, start with the Gianna Center. Explain to people, what are we doing?
Right.
And where does the name come from?
Yeah. Well, the name comes obviously from Saint Gianna Molla, and
tell them who that is.
Sure. She was a saint. She was a pediatrician in Italy in the mid-1900s, and she had several children. And for her last pregnancy, she got pregnant, and she had a fibroid tumor on her uterus. And this is a benign tumor of the uterus that ordinarily doesn't cause too many problems, but they can grow and enlarge during pregnancy, and they can cause problems with preterm delivery. They can cause problems, for instance, a difficult C-section or postpartum bleeding. Doctors recommended that she have an abortion so that they could treat her fibroid tumor, to save her own life. And she said, you know what, I want to be a real mother. I want to sacrifice my life for the sake of my child. So against her doctor's recommendations, she had a C-section and had the baby. The baby was fine. And shortly, several days after her C-section, she developed peritonitis, an infection, and died from complications of that fibroid tumor of her uterus.
And those kids, those children, grow, and now one of them is going to be on our broadcast in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Pierre Luigi.
Yes.
And that's a fascinating story of martyrdom and witness.
Right.
And I think anyone watching this program not being aware of St. Gianna Molla or only vaguely aware of it would have to be deeply moved by that. Right. And in a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, it's one of her sons will be on. Yes. So we'll be back in 2 minutes. This has been an exciting day because everybody's been having trouble with traffic. And as a result, I almost didn't get here. And Dr. Ann Melnick, our other speaker, just arrived and caught in the traffic. And we want to welcome you, Doctor. And what I've decided to do, we're going to not have the calling in part of the broadcast. We have a big subject here, a lot of things to cover. So if you're sitting there next to the telephone wanting to call up, wait till next week because Archbishop Migliore will be here from the United Nations, and he'll be our visit next week. So welcome, Dr. Melnick. And just beforehand, you and Dr. Beiter both are medical doctors, and your particular position is what?
Well, I'm a family physician. I've done extra training in women's health, and I founded the Gianna Center here in Manhattan.
And we explained it, who Gianna was
St.
to
Gianna.
people here. And we've been just talking about some of the procedures that a Catholic gynecologist or doctor working with newborn babies is going to be guiding by. We know, all of us, that there are many things in this area that are acceptable, unfortunately, but are contrary to the divine law. Mm-hmm. Not just against, they're not particularly against the teaching of the Catholic Church. Mm-hmm. They're against the divine will. They're against the scriptures, but people only understand them when they're taught by the Church. in your own work, what do you find some of the great issues that would come to a Catholic gynecologist?
Father, honestly, the OBGYNs and physicians who do reproductive health care, they're the doctors that stand on the front lines in the pro-life movement. And in fact, in medicine in general, physicians are the ones who stand on the front lines. Every single assault on human life occurs in medicine. Every single one.
Everything.
And many of them occur in women's health. And so a pro-life physician, and specifically a pro-life physician who follows the Church's teachings also on contraception, is very hard to find. And part of the reason for that is because of the challenges in becoming a physician if you stand by those values, both through medical training and medical residency, and then even in practice. And so physicians who believe these things strongly face very real discrimination at every point of the process of becoming a physician. And yet, physicians are most needed in those areas.
Would you say that when medical schools that would be identified as Catholic medical schools, it's a kind of questionable point of view, are they strongly teaching the teaching of the Church in this regard?
Father, I didn't attend a Catholic medical school, but what I can tell you is the training that I've done in Catholic hospitals, the principles were actually very directly undermined in the teaching that I received there. In fact, I did my OBGYN training as a student in a Catholic hospital, and the chairman of the OBGYN department told me I didn't have the right to become a doctor if I wasn't willing to prescribe contraception.
Which is openly contrary to the teaching of the Church. And don't be surprised of this. What you ought to do, if you're surprised, is read the Bible. Read the Old Testament. And read when the people of God, the people of Israel, were doing very well. They were ignoring the divine law very easily. Only when things fell apart and the prophets came out, then people were beginning to listen. And, you know, much of this happened in Europe. After the First World War, Europe and the United States less went into a moral blackout, the so-called Roaring '20s. And there was, for the first time in the United States, there was a real public ignoring of the divine law. And the persecution of the Church in Mexico did nothing to stop it. The Knights of Columbus asked the president to intervene in Mexico, the murdering of priests, bishops, burning of churches. He did nothing. And in Europe, much went on. And where did we come? To the Second World War. The great philosopher and theologian, Monsignor Romano Guardini, in his book called The End of the Modern World, says and points out that we are moving in exactly the same direction now. And certainly we see, possibly in the United States and in Europe, a complete loss of moorings with morality. And great numbers of well-meaning people are completely unaware of moral requirements. You know, the severe criticism of Pope Paul VI when he put out the encyclical Humani what?
Humane Vitae.
Humane Vitae. That was part of the whole thing. Well, now we've got two living Catholic physicians, both of them working in the area of OBGYN. What have I got here? Let's give us some ideas.
Well, actually, one thing I was, as you were talking, came to my mind. You know, a lot of the media and maybe people in general think of Catholic medical ethics as a list of negatives: no abortion, no contraception, no sterilization, and so they view Catholic ethics with a very kind of restrictive mindset. And you don't want to get involved in that. When actually, I think actually the converse is true. Catholic ethics centers on the value of the human person in their totality. So it's more than just a list of negatives. It's a real positive of, as John Paul II would put it, a true anthropology of who the human person is and the dignity that they carry from the moment of conception through natural death. And so in the world of OBGYN, that's how Dr. Melnick and I practice. And there's a new science called naprotechnology that I feel goes a far way towards showing that if you follow good ethics, you can get positive outcomes, which can at least meet, if not excel, what's available in conventional obstetrics and gynecology. So
Now, give me that word again.
naprotechnology.
Okay, let's run that one by for our audience. Naprotechnology.
Technology. Yeah.
Tell me what it means.
Yeah. Well, it stands for natural procreative technology, and the basic thought behind it is that the human body is much more wonderful than anything artificial that we can come up with. So the best we can hope to do is to assist it in its own natural functioning. And so the thought of working with a woman's menstrual cycle, first of all, analyzing it and looking at it, and seeing what we can observe about it, taking really careful observations of a woman's monthly cycles, that can uncover pathologies that most doctors overlook because they put every woman on the pill for almost every problem there is in gynecology. So that has gone a long way. It's been developing for the past 30 years, and it's come a long way in recognizing and fostering new treatments in women's health care.
Yeah, so Father, this is a key thing that you're asking, and that is this battle for the lives of the unborn and for women is only going to be won if we can hold out the positive alternative to the things that we are saying to people don't do. Because the longings of the human heart are so deep. And we see this most, I think, maybe most powerfully demonstrated in infertile couples. The longing to have a child is so deep. And couples who are not able to conceive, their suffering is one of the worst sufferings that I have ever seen as a doctor. And so when these couples who are carrying this very heavy cross are looking for help, and they are just given a list of the things not to do, it leads to despair, and it even leads to challenging their faith. And I will tell you, in working with infertile couples, the strongest couples in terms of their faith, daily mass goers, they are tempted to do something like in vitro fertilization because of the desperation they feel. What Catholic doctors, myself, Dr. Beiter, and other Catholic doctors are called to do as part of our vocation is to do everything in our power to give people the positive alternative. We have a positive alternative for treating infertility that works, that is comparable in effectiveness to anything else, but completely respects the dignity of marriage.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? This is all news to me.
Sure. Thank you, Father.
This is not my field.
Yeah, and that's good. Yeah. Well, this is Dr. Beiteris referring to the name that's been given to this approach to women's health care that was developed by a brilliant doctor at Pope Paul VI Institute for the study of human reproduction in Omaha, Nebraska, Dr. Thomas Hilgers, many people that have worked with him for the past 30 years after Humane Vitae, and in response to the call of Humane Vitae, a small group of Catholic physicians felt called to continue working to develop alternatives to what was becoming mainstream in women's health, namely these procedures that replaced the Marriage Act to create children and artificial contraception, which was used to treat everything. And so these doctors and these scientists, in response to Pope Paul VI's call, developed a way to monitor and evaluate the woman's system to find out the underlying causes of her problems, including things like infertility, and then treat them in a way that restores her health rather than shutting down the cycle or bypassing it or replacing. And so it's beautiful, actually. It fits in beautifully with the movement in our culture towards a more ecological way of living. We now have an approach that restores health and function, which honestly is what other doctors do in other areas.
I bring in a question here of a psychologist. The thought in the world of psychology often has believed that often there are psychological blocks to fertility, that by what you would call the word in official language is hysteria. It doesn't mean the popular meaning of hysteria, but by a histrionic way you may not be able to walk. I was working on a case of a man who could not see every other day. He was blind every other day because of certain fears that he had. If that is the case, it would also seem that something like infertility could very easily relate to attitudes, fears, underlying things, that a person who's working positively toward the possibility of conception is going to become more at peace with the idea. I suspect, only women could say this, but it would seem to me, as an old celibate of 77 years, I could imagine women being frightened of becoming pregnant. And although I come from a big family and lots of kids all over the place, there could be a fear that could be there. Is that possible? You've seen things like that.
I mean, that's possible. I mean, in terms of fertility, the hypothalamus and the pituitary, these are parts of the brain that interact with the ovaries and the woman's menstrual cycle. Definitely a lot we don't know about that, and stress has a lot to do with it as well.
We're going to have another break, and we're not going to have questions from the audience tonight because Dr. Melnick was able to get here, and because it's a very serious question. I did want to mention we have a vicar, a visitor this evening, Bishop Hyacinth Agebo, missionary of St. Paul, bishop in Nigeria. Welcome this evening, Bishop.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, break, I mentioned to Dr. Melnick and Dr. Beiter that I am the layman in this situation. I'm not used to being the layman, but I am the layman in this particular situation. And we were talking about the very interesting phenomena of an infertile mother adopting a child and then suddenly becoming pregnant and having a nice, healthy baby. What do you think is behind this?
Well, Father, it's very interesting. We actually see things like that all the time. A couple working with us at the center will begin going through the process of being treated for infertility. They'll reach a point somewhere along the road where they're just fed up, or they get into a fight with the husband and they decide, this month we're done, we're not trying. And that's the month that they conceive. And it's unfortunately this vicious cycle. The process of infertility, of struggling with infertility, is so stressful. And then the stress of that makes the ability to conceive even more difficult. But the connection between the mind and the reproductive system, particularly in the woman's body, is very profound. And so, yeah, there are couples who conceive the cycle after they've stopped all of their treatment, after years of trying.
Isn't that amazing? You know, it's a mysterious reality, and it is very much the work of God. People start fooling around with organizing things about human development, conception, and fool around with things. They are working against the will of God. And this is what people deny with contraception. You know, a great many people don't recognize, at least personally, that contraception is wrong. It's accepted so widely, and the ordinary person may find themselves in a very difficult position. They cannot support have another child. Right now they have 3, and they can't handle it, and they think the only possible way for them is contraception. One of my relatives, they had their 5th child, and he said to me, I'm going to name him after the Pope. because of the so-called rhythm system and things like that. There are very real human issues here. And I always try, and I think the vast majority of priests try to be compassionate, understanding, and perhaps at times backing off from what we ought to really say. Have you ever seen that? Felt that the church, or the voice of the church, is kind of weak in some of this area? Have you had that experience?
Well, I think it may be, one in part because perhaps many priests and religious don't know there's a very effective alternative in NAPRA technology. One segment of NAPRA technology is called the fertility care system, and that's the system where women learn to chart their monthly cycles. To put it simplistically, they learn when they are ovulating, basically, based on certain aspects of their cycle. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but this method in a large, it was about a 5-state study with, I think, over 1,000 couples. Anyhow, they found that it was, if used correctly, about 99.5% effective at avoiding pregnancy at a year. And that is actually higher than the birth control pill. And the average use, so the average person, maybe they didn't understand exactly right on some point, 96.8% effective. The average effectiveness of the birth control pill is 92% at avoiding pregnancy. So here we have yet another example of how Catholic-inspired ethics and medicine can lead to a superior alternative when viewed against conventional OBGYN. And so many priests, religious, many women aren't aware they have this alternative, which is clearly superior. They don't have to take steroid hormones that have many different effects on their bodies, risks of various kinds of cancer. That's simply not necessary.
And the system, actually, I have taught it to lay people who are not Catholic, and particularly through my years training. I would talk about natural family planning just as a natural alternative to hormonal contraceptives for spacing children. And many of my colleagues were interested in learning the method for their own use, simply because it was natural and it was effective. In fact, when I was in medical school, the president of the Medical Students for Choice group switched to natural family planning because she was into the all natural, didn't want to use hormones. When I've done talks at pre-Cana, the same thing. After the talks, women come up to me and say they've been waiting for an alternative because they don't like putting the hormones in their body.
Now, you have your own clinic here in New York named after St. Gianna Lola, which is, that's kind of a very beautiful thing. This is fairly rare throughout the country that you would find an explicitly committed Catholic service. How do people get to it? How do they call up?
We do have a website, which when I was watching because of the traffic, I saw you beautifully listed for us, so thank you. We can be found online. I can give you our phone number. We are right in Midtown Manhattan.
What's our email? I mean,
what's the website?
Yeah, what's the website?
It's www.gianna, Gianna health.org.
Which I spoke of it before. Make sure that 2 N's there.
2 N's,
you won't go
after
through.
St. Gianna.
And it's rather fascinating that her son will be on our program in 2 weeks.
Yeah, he is coming into town actually on May 16th and 17th. It's wonderful. He's going to appear on your program. And then our center is co-sponsoring an event with the Family Life Office of New York, a special mass actually being said for the intentions of couples who are struggling with infertility.
Wonderful. Tell us about
or
this.
recurrent miscarriage. Just a way to show any couple struggling with infertility, but even more so Catholic couples, that the church stands with them and beside them in their struggle, and that there are alternatives available.
Where is the Mass going to be?
That'll be at St. Catherine of Siena in Manhattan on 68th Street. Mass is at 6:30.
6:30 on
Followed on May 17th.
May 17th at St. Catherine of Siena Church. Now that's the Dominican Church, which is right near New York Hospital. It's just down the street from New York Hospital. A beautiful church, by the way. And so that will be there at 6:30 on
May 17th.
Which is what day of the week?
A Monday.
A Monday.
And St. Gianna's son, Pier Luigi, will be giving a talk afterwards about St. Gianna with a special blessing with her relics.
Isn't that marvelous? Please, if you're a New Yorker, try to get out. And if you live around the country, fly in.
Wonderful.
Now, you know, we fight on. And Christians can get discouraged. And other people, Jewish people, can get discouraged because we have the divine law. And in our histories, both the Jews and the Christians, often, as we see in the scriptures, they fall away, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And people don't get things done. They fail. So if you see in the Old Testament, some of the prophets at first didn't do well, and the apostles didn't do well. But you come back and you go at it again, and you stay at it to the end of the road. Now, particularly, this is not an area that I have any expertise in at all. For 35 years, I've been a psychologist for priests and ministers about spiritual direction and therapy. So it's far away from anything I understand. But I wanted to hear you very much on this issue because priests and deacons need to be preaching the teaching of the church. When I was younger, I recall that it was preached, but unfortunately, the teaching on Sunday has become rather, well, I would remind me of a meeting of the Kiwanis Club, you know, be nice, be nice, be nice. They said it once, they said it twice. And we need to teaching the divine will. When people do not do the divine will, they bring catastrophe upon themselves. And we see this, a very frightening and serious example presently in the church now, that many religious communities have failed in large letters to follow their belief, their intention, their vocation. And these communities are disappearing. The average membership is in the late 70s. And nobody is admitting that we made a big mistake. So I've been very involved in trying to be with our friars and our sisters to be authentic religious. And we're sympathetic to this understanding. Some of our sisters are nurses and understand these things better. Now, wrapping it up, put you both on the spot here. Give us a point for everyone to keep in their mind that you might be able to do something effective for people morally seeking the fulfillment of the divine law about conception, birth, and care. We've all got relatives, even old people like this, my grandnieces and nephews. I bet it was the other day, the baby is coming. Tell us, what should we be doing?
Well, a recent story comes to mind, something in our practice. You know, as I mentioned before earlier, IVF, in vitro fertilization, is considered the gold standard. And so whenever a woman goes to any other fertility doctor, that's what she's rapidly pushed towards. And so I think that colors what that physician will obviously tell the patient, and when they're treating her and looking for things. The example is I had a patient who came and the IVF doctor said, oh, you don't have any endometriosis. He did a surgery on her, looked for endometriosis. He said, okay, no endometriosis. And then he said, oh, your tubes are blocked as well. So we're just going to have to do IVF. So she wanted alternatives, so came to see us. And when I evaluated her, again, with Napa technology involves a very thorough look into any possible underlying causes of infertility. And again, I don't have in the back of my mind, oh, I'm just going to go towards IVF. I really, truly am looking for the underlying causes. So when I carefully evaluated her tubes, they were open, and she did, in fact, have endometriosis, which I treated. So that came about, obviously, because of a commitment to looking at underlying causes, a commitment to treating the whole person, and a commitment to help them conceive with an act of love with their spouse, which is a wonderful, of course, the best way to bring a child into the world, and something that other IVF physicians will many times overlook.
So there's a perfect example.
Perfect example.
And Father, I think we have a phenomenal alternative to the birth control pill, to in vitro fertilization. It's effective, it's based in science. But something that we didn't really touch on, and what we are finding is the reason that women want to come to us, is that because of our Christian faith and our Christian roots, We treat every person who comes to us as a person of profound dignity. And so we spend time with them, we listen to their problems, we walk with them through this journey. They're not a number. We're not a used cars salesman trying to sell them the best model. We are there to be their doctor and to provide authentic health care that respects their dignity. And they know that when they come.
You know, the other side, because for years before I was working with priests, I was chaplain of Children's Village in Dobbs Ferry, New York, which was is a psychiatric treatment center for emotionally disturbed children. I was there 14 years, and 2,500 kids went through it. Many of them adults who run into, some of them work for me now, and boys that were not all Catholic by any means. And now those boys would now be 45, 50 years old. And I meditate on these youngsters. Some of them were born in the most difficult of situations, the most difficult. I knew more than one child who was the product of a rape. And you know, one youngster said to me, "I'm a mistake. I'm a mistake." And I said to him, "Nobody can be a mistake because God gave you his life." And he had to think better about himself. And that boy did well. He, a good many of the boys from Children's Village actually succeed and get a decent job, and a number go on to college, and surprisingly well. Now, I was always aware that with that crowd of 300 noisy kids, God had sent them to us. God sent them to them. I once was in a very difficult situation. It was Christmas, and I was giving out a lot of food out of my van, and I saw a poor old lady looking through the garbage. And it was a cold night, 2 or 3 days before Christmas, and I had nothing left. And I stopped and I said, "What are you looking for?" She said, "I'm looking for something to eat." So I said, "Let's go over there and we'll buy a lot of nice things for you." And she said to me, "God sent you to me." A sweet old African-American lady. She said, "God sent you to me." And I got back in my van and I said to the other brother with me, I said, "You know, she said God sent us to her, but God sent us to her as well." I never forgot that for the rest of my life. God sent you to me. And every child you meet, God sent him to me, to her. Everyone, whether they have serious congenital difficulties or what have you, God sent them to me. And Cardinal Cook, the saintly Archbishop of New York, constantly reminded us that every human being is so important because they are given to us by God. I want to thank both of these very fine physicians. It was an unusual program, and we had very serious discussion. I hope you paid attention. And Dr. Beiter, Dr. Melnick, we are very grateful, and I hope we will pray, all of us, for you and your work.
Thank you.
O Lord, in your goodness and mercy, we thank you all, and we'll ask on our doctors and on all the mothers and the little babies coming tonight in the whole world. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. As always, I have to put in my call for supporting EWTN. So please, we had a beautiful broadcast this evening, and I hope that you'll help EWTN with a check. God bless.